All right, let's get started. Once again, my name is Parker Townley. This is the Fair Trade Colleges and Universities Procurement webinar. Let's go ahead and start moving through our presentation today. But first, let's cover a couple of logistical issues. Please take note that there will be a recording of this presentation available. We will send you an email with links in a few days. Plus, we'll post the recording on social media and on our website. So if you know anyone that was not able to make it to the webinar that really would benefit from some of these resources, please go ahead and include them into the availability of the recording. Second, questions are welcome. To ensure we have high audio quality, we'll be muting everyone but the presenters. So to ask questions, please do the following. 1, locate the chat box by scrolling your mouse to the top of the screen. 2, click on the chat icon. 3, you'll then type into the chat box. 4, the moderator will then compile and ask questions to the panelists during the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. So feel free to ask questions at any time, and we'll forward them on to the presenters for the end of the presentation. So let's start by taking a step back to get a firm understanding of what we're looking to achieve out of this purchasing issues. So we're looking to, quote, transition institutional purchasing to fair trade as much as possible. And really all of our education and advocacy efforts as part of fair trade colleges and universities and fair trade campaigns leads in this direction because it's a clear way to increase the impact of fair trade for farmers, workers, and artisans all around the world. We're very excited about the documents and resources outlined in this presentation today and the potential benefits they could generate through institutional purchasing around the country. So let's get started. Today we'll be covering 1, what is a procurement policy and why is it important? 2, fair trade campaigns, resources and support. 3, the purchasing policy pilot with Rollins College, and then we'll finish up with a question and answer period. It's designed to really make as much of an effort to answer your questions as possible. So once again, go ahead and feel free to type those questions into that chat box at the top of your screen, and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can. So let me introduce to you our 2 presenters for today. Sarah Church is a research analyst and policy specialist with the Responsible Purchasing Network, with whom we partnered with over the last 2 years to develop these materials and policies. Meanwhile, Anne Francis is the program coordinator for the sustainability program at Rollins College. Thank you both for helping us work through this process and for sharing your insights. And with that, I'm going to hand things off to Sarah Church, and she'll begin to explain a little bit of the background behind procurement and purchasing.
Thanks so much, Parker. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and it was a pleasure to work with the Fair Trade Campaigns team on developing these draft policies and the 2 guides that we will tell you all about on today's webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit about what a purchasing policy is and why it's important to give some background and framework for fair trade purchasing work that hopefully you will all be doing on your campuses. Next slide. I want to start by letting you know a little bit about my organization, Responsible Purchasing Network. We're a network of buyers from all over the world that works together on socially responsible and environmentally sustainable purchasing. We pool the resources of purchasers and people who care about sustainability and other related issues to provide technical assistance. We develop guides and calculators, guides much like the ones that you'll be seeing today on the webinar. And we put together model policies, the documents that you need to draw from, contracts, bid specifications, that help make sustainable and just purchasing a snap for purchasers and beyond. Next slide. So why does college and university purchasing matter? It's a good question. Fair trade campaigns has started to focus in on institutional purchasing, not only colleges and universities, but also cities, towns, other large purchasers. And this institutional purchasing includes services that are purchased by households, such as a college education, and it ends up comprising, as you can see here, over 2/3 of the $15.3 trillion that makes up the demand engine of our economy. So shifting institutional purchasing to fair trade can actually have a big impact on markets and really lead to support for fair trade producers. And within these trillions of dollars, roughly $5 billion is spent per year by universities and colleges just on food and food services. So this is a very big number still, but it starts to be one that we can kind of get our hands around, influencing the food services purchasing, the food purchasing on campuses. And from the perspective of your particular campus, at your college and your university, these dollars start to be in reach, these very large numbers. Next slide. So what's a purchasing policy? Well, a policy helps to direct the trillions of dollars spent annually by institutions towards the kind of purchasing that those institutions want to support. And sometimes the product specifications that come up have a variety of different goals behind them. For example, if you want to buy grade A beef, that might be for health reasons. Fuel-efficient vehicles might be for environmental reasons. There are also vendor preferences that are put into contract language and into policies. Your institution might want to support local businesses or support student-run projects and uses purchasing to do so. And these are all written up in purchasing policies. So policies really allow the institution to balance the performance of the goods or services, their price to get the right value for the students who ultimately end up paying the bill, and the values. What kind of community building or social justice or public service values the institution really wants to support. So to help you get started on working on your own purchasing policy, next slide please, we'd like to present you with some campaign resources and support so that you can get a lay of the land. Next slide. There are three main resources, three ways to get your campaign rolling. The first is a model procurement policy, and alongside that comes supplemental policies, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. We also have two guides, a guide for you, for campaigners, and a purchasing guide that's for purchasers and anyone else who wants to understand the purchasing process. Next slide. So I'll start with our model policy. This is a great resource because it puts all of the sort of legal language that you will need to base your policy on into 5 pages of fun. It starts with definitions. What do we mean by fair trade? You know, it's a term that people throw around, but we really want to be very specific if we're putting it into a policy. It lays out the very strong requirements and enforcement language in a way that can be understood by your institution. There are certain phrases, certain ways that typically needs to be put so it can be put into practice. And this policy focuses on 4 major commodities: coffee, tea, sugar, and cocoa. And the reason we selected those products, there are actually a wide variety, more products than that available fair trade, as many of you know, from bananas to rice to, on and on. But these 4 products are plentiful in the marketplace. They've been around relatively longer than some of the other fair trade available products, so they've become price competitive in the marketplace, which is great to see. And they're also part of a beverage service. They're part of food service altogether. So it's easy to kind of focus on those 4 products together. Next slide, please. So the model policy can give you a sense of the language that you might need to put into practice on your campus, and we hope that you will use it, you'll adapt it to your own needs. But some campuses already have other parallel efforts going on about food purchasing, maybe it's local food purchasing, sustainable purchasing or sustainable action in general. There are a lot of different efforts on campuses, and we certainly don't want to collide with those efforts. In fact, fair trade works very well alongside many of those efforts. So if you, for example, have a local food purchasing goals on your campus, local and fair trade go very well together, because local purchasing usually doesn't capture imported goods like coffee and cocoa. So you can have your local purchasing for products available made in the U.S. and locally, and then you can have fair trade that complements it for imported goods. Fair trade also fits into sustainability frameworks, fair labor frameworks. So any kinds of efforts going on in your campus, you can really be collaborative with those efforts and see how fair trade fits in. And fair trade is also promoted under these broader food and sustainability purchasing goals by the organizations you see here, the Real Food Challenge, the STARS program of ASHE, and the LEED standard. But with these programs, you don't necessarily know that your campus is buying all fair trade, or they might not actually be buying fair trade at all, because they might be earning points towards the program with other kinds of purchasing or other kinds of sustainability actions. So if you want to be doing fair trade purchasing, you can use these supplemental policies. They're sort of short little resources that have all the content of our model policy, but also can have language that allows them to attach to other issues, and they're kind of short pieces that you can slip into another policy. So we hope that these will be really useful to you if there are other efforts going on campus that you want to work with, and help facilitate collaboration and coordination with all other great food purchasing work and sustainability work on your campus. Next slide. So the end goal of this work is really getting to the purchasing. Can I have the next slide, please? So you want to make sure that your policy work is leading you into the kind of program, which is the internal framework for purchasing, such as staff time and trainings, and that then leads into practices. And in this case, the practice we want is contract language that requires fair trade products. And then if we're successful, the practices leads to purchasing of fair trade coffee, tea, sugar, and cocoa. So you can see policy leads to program, practices, and then purchasing. And that means that when you're working on policy, you want to keep the end goal in mind. You want to make sure that what you're getting at is easy implementation. And that can take a lot of thinking during the policy process, and we hope that the materials we have provided for you will help you think through these 4 steps so you can make sure you get to the purchasing you want to see. Next slide. So one of these resources to help get you started is a campaigner's guide, and I'll pass it over to Parker to talk a little bit about that.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm guessing that not all of us are procurement experts. So to make things easy and understandable, we've developed a campaigner's guide that provides an overview of the process, as well as enough information about specific topics to guarantee that you're ready to get moving. The campaigner's guide helps walk you through researching existing policies, how to cultivate relationships with institutional officials, and provides definitions for some of the more technical terms you'll see as part of this work. Overall, the campaigner's guide helps provide a simple and quick introduction to the world of procurement, all within about 3 or 4 pages. So the idea is to take a lot of the different resources that we've developed through some of these other 3, 4, 5 resources and compile it into one easy-to-use document that can teach you everything you need to know to get a gauge for if this is something that really is reasonable for your campaign to tackle. And with that, I'm going to head back to Sarah.
So,
Go.
Thanks. So the final resource we want to present to you, we showed you the policy and the campaigner's guide, and now the purchasing guide. This will help you see things from the purchaser's perspective, which is a great way to get from policy all the way through the steps to implementation. And this resource is intended for purchasers and anyone else who wants to learn more about what the purchasing process, the nitty-gritty of the purchasing process really looks like. So it goes through what fair trade labels are out there, what they look like, what they mean, how to find them, how best to write language into your contracts or your bid solicitation documents that help communicate fair trade requirements to the vendors that want to sell to your college or university. It's important to have kind of the right language, the right approach to that. And also how to request fair trade products and get the best prices available. So I want to give you a little sense, a little nugget, a sneak peek at the guide. Next slide, please. This will give you a sense of one of the tips and tricks that's included in this purchasing guide that might be useful to you as a campaigner. Even if you aren't a purchaser, there are some nuances of the process that you might want to become familiar with so that you can really make sure that this is working well on your campus. So one sample question is, what if our food service provider can't find fair trade sugar? If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, there's this icon of this grocery bag along with all the fair trade products. So this represents the fact that most campuses have an existing contract with a single vendor that provides food, either through full food services or through a contract where they sell all the needed food to your campus, all from one vendor. So what if that one vendor says, sorry, we can't get any fair trade sugar for you, or puts up another roadblock to getting a fair trade product? In this case, it might be time for your campaign to get a little technical. You'll want to work with whoever helps to negotiate the contracts at your university, usually that's a purchaser, and ask them about opportunity buys. And opportunity buys are purchases made by the university from another vendor other than their main vendor. And usually that's because the main vendor can't provide the needed product. In this example, maybe fair trade sugar. So sometimes opportunity buys are allowed by your contract, but sometimes they're blocked or big fees are attached to them, and that's designed to discourage your school from taking their money to a smaller vendor or someone other than the main vendor. So you can find out what the case is with your contract and see if there's any wiggle room to make a quote-unquote opportunity buy for sugar. And that term may not be what your purchaser uses, so you can just kind of explain the concept, buying products off of the main contract. If there isn't wiggle room in your contract, you can go ahead with other fair trade purchasing, and when the contract comes back around for negotiation, you can actually push for the right to use opportunity buys for fair trade goods or for other products. You can push for that language to be right there in the contract. And that's useful because not only do opportunity buys get you the products you want, but they can also create an incentive. If your vendor sees another company being able to come in and get some of their business, if they can't, for example, provide fair trade sugar, then they'll try to stop that by providing the sugar themselves to you. And that expands the market for fair trade goods. It expands availability. This is all really good for our ultimate goals with fair trade purchasing. Next slide, please. So that was just a little sample of some of the things you can get from the Purchaser's Guide. And we hope you'll check out all three of the resources, see how they can be of use to you. And use them in your campaign. So thank you so much for having me. I'll pass it back to Parker.
Thank you, Sarah. And with that, we're going to go a little bit into a pilot that we were so fortunate to run with folks from Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. As I said earlier, the procurement policies have been developed over the last about 2 years. Starting in January of this last year, we managed to work with Anne to be able to see how to work through this process with administration officials from Rollins College and work out some of the kinks associated. So I'm going to in turn hand it over to Anne and let her take it away. Thank you, Anne.
Hi, thanks, Parker, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this webinar. I'm very excited to be able to help maybe explain some of the processes that we went through here at Rollins College that might help other colleges. As you all can see on the very first bullet point that I have on this slide is build relationships, and I can't stress that enough right from the start and through the process and even afterwards, of course. I mean, we got our designation as a Fair Trade College in spring this year, 2013, and that relationship building continues on. But the first thing that we did was, and you all may already have something similar to this, but we have a committee on the campus called the Committee on Environmental and Sustainable Issues. So that relationship there with that committee, which includes faculty, staff, and students, was the start of talking about fair trade on the campus. So with those relationships, we were able to decide what kind of subcommittees that we wanted to put together, and of course one of them included the Fair Trade Subcommittee. And with the subcommittee that we had for working on the Fair Trade designation, what we started to do was to meet with all different factions on this campus, and this was before we started on the purchasing and procurement side of the Fair Trade initiative, going to meet with students at the Student Government Association, and from there meeting with faculty, going to faculty meetings, meeting with different faculty like finance and services. We've got a couple of different schools here. We've got CPS and A&S, so we had to, meet with many different areas of the faculty. And then we also met with the Staff Advisory Committee. This was all to build support from all these different areas on the campus, because our goal was to, before we even went to the administration, which we knew was long down the road, we wanted to be able to show that we had support from all these different areas on the campus. When it came to going to purchasing, as Sarah and Parker mentioned, we were working with them as a pilot school with the procurement policies. And with the relationship that we had on the campus with the purchasing department, we were able to sit with them to go through all the different points on the procurement policy. And it took us months to go back and forth with what they were looking for, what we were looking for, what Sarah and Parker were looking for. It just went back and forth, talking about it. But eventually it took us months and months to go through that part of it. But eventually we were able to reach an agreement, so to speak, with the purchasing policy and then also having our resolution that we also put together for signature by our Vice President of Business and Finance. And with that, one of the main things I want to mention is patience is something that you really, really, really have to have with all of this, because I thought that we would be able to get through it, and I even was giving us plenty of time, 6 to 8 months, and it took a solid year to get through all the processes to make sure that we had all of the support that we could get from all the different areas on the campus before it was actually presented to the administration here for them to approve and to sign. And I must say, by the time the resolution and the purchasing policy got to the administration, after it had been worked through all these different areas, there really wasn't a way, they really couldn't say no to it because of the relationships that we had built and the support that we had gotten. So that's where being patient comes in. As long as if you can build all the steps up to that part, then you're not going to have as difficult a time, I don't think, with the administration. At least we didn't. But of course, every school is going to be different. When it comes to the policies, and I know that one thing that both Sarah and Parker feel very strongly about are the policies on how strict that they are. The fact that we were able to put in to the policy that it wasn't mandatory for everybody to have to buy fair trade was huge for us, and let me explain that. It's because as we're working further now that we've got our fair trade designation, as we work further with this, of course we're going to be working towards making the policy even more strict than it is. But to be able to get everybody on board, get our vendors on board for the policy that we had written up, not having, the fact that it's not mandatory for everything to be a fair trade item makes it easier to influence them further down the road to provide more fair trade. As I said, we got our fair trade designation in the spring, and then over the summer, as we were visiting with our different vendors to talk to them about where we were going, we realized that they were adding more fair trade even without us having met with them between the time we got the designation and the summertime. So the seed was planted, so to speak, so they knew what we were going to be looking for. They knew that we were going to be meeting with them in the future to talk about this, about how we want to add more and more fair trade. So, and that is what's happening. We are adding more, and we're doing research. One of the things that I failed to mention earlier was do your research on your companies, on your vendors. For us, our dining services is run by Sodexo. Our bookstore is Follett. We did a lot of research beforehand to find out what kind of policies that they have in place. For instance, on Sodexo's website, they say on their website that they have approved 80 fair trade items. Not that we can get 80 fair trade items, but we know that they offer 80 fair trade items somewhere throughout the country. So that was a good point for us to bring up, for them to be looking for more of the items that Sodexo has approved to be purchased and offered to schools throughout the country. And Follett also has a strong, not fair trade policy, but they do have a strong, I'm not quite sure what it's called, but a responsible purchasing policy. So they had already had Alta Gracia as an approved vendor for clothing. So we do have Alta Gracia clothing in our bookstore now, and as I said, they are adding more. So that's where we are with our fair trade initiative. It took some time, but it's one step at a time, being patient, finding all the different areas throughout the campus that you can go to for support, because that's what you need. You need the support of students, faculty, and staff, students being the most powerful voice on the campus. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anne. And so with that, we're going to move on into the question and answer portion of this webinar. And before we go into that, I do want to note that all of the resources that we've discussed today will be posted on the Fair Trade College and University's resource section of our website. In addition, we'll be linking out to those resources in a follow-up email to everyone that has attended the webinar today. So keep a lookout for that, and let's move on to questions. To make sure that everyone knows how to ask a question, I'm going to review a little bit of the technical side of things. To ask a question, simply locate the chat box by scrolling your mouse to the top of the screen. Up there, you will click on the chat icon, type into the chat box that appears up, and then the moderator will then compile and ask questions to the panelists. One quick question that we've heard a number of times is for Sarah. If we are working on a policy, should we start out requiring all coffee and tea, etc., to be fair trade, or should we work up to that point? So, Sarah, I'll let you take that question.
Sure, thanks. Well, I really appreciate what Anne shared about experience on the Rollins campus on that issue. It sounds like what worked in the context of your school, Anne, was to not require all coffee, tea, sugar, and cocoa up front to be fair trade, and that was sort of a non-starter on your campus. But Our model policy does require these products to be all switched to fair trade, and we stand by that. And we've seen it. It can work. That can work well in terms of purchasing policy implementation. I'll just explain a little bit. Of course, it helps to maximize the impact, which is the goal, because you'll be buying more of those products, but it can also help with the purchasing side. The reason for that is that larger volume purchasing usually gets greater discounts. It's sort of a simple equation. If the supplier of fair trade products gets more business and they can stand to get less profit per item, prices go down. It's sort of the same idea behind Costco and other wholesalers, if you are all familiar with those. So if you don't go fully fair trade, vendors will kind of start to view fair trade products as a specialty item, or they could. They could also know how serious the campus is about buying them, but they could see them as a specialty item, and they might kind of want a higher profit margin. They might think that because they might think that the products are only going to be purchased at low quantities, and it does cost them money to source different products, especially if they are doing those in low quantities. They have to send a truck out, just for a smaller amount of items. So it's something that they are paying attention to for sure. But if the whole dining hall goes fair trade, for example, it would get the same discounts from the vendor as regular coffee or tea. And in many cases, that would mean a comparable price. And so you won't have some of the price concerns that might come up if fair trade is viewed as a specialty item. So yes, we would recommend trying for fully fair trade purchasing if you can. And of course, kind of take the temperature on your campus the way Ann did. I think the work that they did at Rollins is really excellent. But if you can try for fully fair trade purchasing, that might actually get you the greatest selection and price of fair trade products, because you'll have that higher volume and because your vendor will understand how serious you are about buying fair trade, and they'll kind of sharpen their pencils and give you the biggest discounts they can to make sure that they keep your contract.
Great. Thank you. Another question that we have is, if we're talking to purchasers about fair trade, what are the best ways to convince them that fair trade purchasing is a good idea beyond the argument that it's simply the right thing to do? And I have a quick answer for this, and then I'll head over to Sarah to expand a bit. But with some of the food service providers, they oftentimes have fair trade as part of their operating mission. Sodexo is a great example of this. As part of their Better Tomorrow commitments, they actually have 14 different commitments to sustainability, one of which is actually fair trade procurement and purchasing. So if you kind of do a little bit of your research, as Ann suggested earlier, and make sure that you understand exactly where some of these companies are coming from, you can often find that they do value their supply chains and all of the people all along the way. It's just making sure that with some of these larger companies, the communication may not be able to get to everyone along the chain. So you need to remind people every now and then of the larger directives. Sarah, do you want to chime in on that question?
Sure. Well, I think this speaks to the point you made about the policies that your food service provider may have. I think it's also, before you interface with purchasers, there's sort of a pre-step, which is that it's great to pass a policy, right? To have it kind of on the books that that fair trade purchasing should be happening on your campus, that the students want it, that the campus community wants it, the administration wants it. And this is good because, thinking from the perspective of a purchaser, purchasers are basically, they're in their positions because they're really good at balancing a wide variety of rules and regulations and still getting a good deal for the university. I mean, that's their job, is to do that. And we don't necessarily want it to be an individual purchaser who kind of takes on the idea of fair trade and gets really excited about it. That's always great to have. But then what if that purchaser moves on or changes to another product category, and they're no longer buying food products or whatever it is, then the program kind of disappears with them. So you want to make sure that there's institutional buy-in. That will also help you increase and expand your fair trade purchasing over time. It's great to have the policy in place to really kind of, make sure that everyone's on board with it. So I'd say that's the pre-step, is passing the policy. And then there are two arguments that kind of can help get a purchaser on your side. First, fair trade is designed to make purchasing easier on purchasers. Think about it. All they have to do is look for that fair trade label. So there are some really worthy purchasing goals out there like local and so on that don't have that easy label. But with fair trade, you got the easy label. It's designed to be easy to identify, find, and purchase. So that's a great way to kind of introduce it to purchasers. And secondly, fair trade products are widely available in the marketplace, and they're often cost competitive. So they're easy to find, and it's easy to promote your college or university's values through purchasing with fair trade. And as Parker said, a lot of the food service companies have these policies, and as Anne mentioned with Sodexo on her campus, you can find them from food service providers. You can even find fair trade products from office supply companies like Staples and Office Depot. So, as long as if you're showing purchasers that it'll kind of easy to implement this and that it's in line with the values and the policies of your university or college, that's the best way to get started. And, one last piece, which is that you can always make sure that they have a copy of our purchaser's guide, and that'll give them suggestions for ways to navigate any questions that come up. It'll answer any questions that they have.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And again, as a side note, we will have a recording of this presentation available for anyone that you want to send this presentation to. A question for Anne. We are pretty focused as a movement on food, but fair trade also encompasses other areas for purchasing. And as Sarah alluded to, part of our experience actually got us involved with a couple of groups beyond Sodexo, for example, on campus. And so, Anne, I was wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit about that experience and some of the groups that you had to work with, in addition to simply the dining services.
Oh, sure. Well, as I mentioned before, our bookstore is run by Follett, and the research that we did with Follett, we could see that they had already had sustainable policies in their guidelines. So we kind of knew when we were walking into the bookstore that we were ahead of the game, so to speak, because we did see that there were other schools that had the clothing line Alta Gracia in their bookstores. So myself and students met with the manager of our Follett store, and all what she had to do was get in touch with her main office to find out if there was any problem with us being slated to add Alta Gracia to our bookstore, and there wasn't. But it took time because, again, another thing with the patient thing, because they plan their marketing well ahead of a semester. So even though we had gone in, I don't know, it was probably June or July last summer of 2012, they had already set their marketing for the fall. So we worked with them to see what they were going to bring in during the fall for the spring. So we knew that it was going to be there for our spring semester and then of course into the future. With another vendor on the campus that we have is our Cornell Fine Arts Museum has a gift shop, and lucky for us, the gift shop was already down. Now we are situated in a small town called Winter Park, Florida. They were designated as a fair trade town the spring before us, so 2012 they were designated as a fair trade town, and our museum gift shop was on their list of fair trade vendors. So all we had to do was walk in there and see exactly what they had to offer that was fair trade. So that part was a little too easy for us going over to the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. And of course, along with, I did want to mention, Sarah was mentioning about Sodexo and coffee and everything. We do, and I had mentioned this before, all of our coffee on the campus is fair trade. They do offer fair trade tea, and they offer, I'm pretty sure all of the sugar is now fair trade also. And of course the decaf is all fair trade. So we do have a little bit there that is already completely fair trade. And when it comes to catering on the campus, we have a lot of catered events on the campus, not just for our folks here on the campus, but for off-campus people that come onto the campus. So anytime that they have any events where they're going to have catering, which they have to use Sodexo on the campus, and they have coffee and decaf at their event, it's going to be fair trade. And as I said, pretty much the sugar is all fair trade too. So those are the main vendors that we have on our campus. We're not a large campus. Our day school is 1,900 students. So all of the dining services are run by Sodexo. So anything that Sodexo does affects all of the dining services that are on the campus.
Great. And then a quick follow-up question, Anne, for you. If you're a student or staff or faculty member that's just getting started and trying to get a layout of the land, what office on campus would you usually recommend reaching out to first as part of this process?
Well, the first thing, as I mentioned earlier, you're talking about where would somebody start to start the Fair Trade Initiative? Is that what you mean?
With the purchasing side of things, with the purchasing policy, what office would you go to learn about what policies may already be in place, the process that you need to go to be able to pass a policy, that sort of thing?
Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Now I understand. That would be business services. Our business services director is the first person that we went to and then worked with her team on the purchasing policy.
Great. And on some other campuses, this oftentimes will be a finances or a purchasing office. It kind of depends on the size of the university. Sarah and I, in a lot of our research and some of the information gathering that we were doing over the last year or so, got to talk with a lot of different people from a lot of different universities, and they all wear different hats. So sometimes that requires being a little bit creative in how you kind of go about these things.
And a lot of I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say a lot of research can be done on your own website to find where purchasing policies are. So, you could do research there at your own site just to try and figure out exactly which offices that you're going to. And as I said, we have a business services, but our purchasing department sits under business services, and they all report to our vice president of business and finance. So it all kind of that's the flow here. And it's the vice president of business and finance who did sign off on our resolution and our purchasing policy.
Can you unmute Sarah? And Sarah, you're on.
I wanted to add something, which is that, Anne, from your position within the sustainability office, you already had these relationships and are the sustainability contact on your campus, but it's also great to get started by finding other people who might be interested in helping promote fair trade, who might have a different position on campus. So if you're a student group, you can go to if there's an office of sustainability or, that supports fair labor practices or a committee of some kind, other student groups. It's great to gather that support, and those people might have done work in the past. I imagine, Anne, you've done a lot of work around promoting sustainability on campus, so you have relationships and things that you could share with the fair trade effort. That can be a good first step or a good step right after getting in touch with the business services or administration department.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And one final question. So how do you make sure that companies have fair trade offerings? For example, if you're working with Aramark or Bon Appetit, how can you get fair trade served by those groups? And to answer this question, each company is going to have a different range of offerings because they partner with different distributors, and that's even dependent on the region for a given company. So Bon Appetit, for example, which works on a number of different campuses across the country, they have a local buying preference that really focuses on working with roasters that are within a given region for coffee, for example. They've also managed to start working with fruit and various other providers in a similar capacity. So oftentimes I'll just require you to kind of go ahead and talk with your dining manager and kind of see exactly what their order sheets are like. Sarah, would you like to expand on this and kind of talk a little bit about opportunity buys and how that ties in there?
Sure. Well, opportunity buys are a great tool. The sort of technical tip and trick that I gave earlier about how to, you can find out what's available with the current vendor that you have, and then you can also explore opportunities for buying things from a vendor other than your main vendor or your current vendor. And sometimes there will be allowances for that in the contracts that you currently have, and sometimes you will, work with whoever you have currently, and then they know that when the contract comes up for renegotiation, that if you have a list of preferences for your food buying that they aren't fulfilling, that you might, be able to incorporate that into your contracting process and find a vendor who can give that to you, can give you those fair trade products or whatever else it is that your campus wants. So I think the point that I want to make about getting fair trade served by your vendor is that these things are always up for negotiation. Your college or university is probably a significant customer, even if it's a small institution. It's an institutional purchaser, so it's significant from the perspective of the food service provider or your vendor. And so you can kind of say, these are the products we want, and work with them. Really, open the conversation, but really work with them, maybe over time. But kind of say, this is what we want to buy, and it'll be up to them to find that for you, or you can find other ways, such as using the Opportunity Buys tool to buy from a vendor that's not your main vendor. And there are other tips about that. Just to put in another plug for the Purchaser's Guide. There are some, there's the contracting language that you might want to look into, and some of those technical things that will help you make sure you're getting the most fair trade products from the vendors that are available to you or new vendors.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Anne. And with that, I think we're going to end for today. So thank you, everyone who attended, as well as our two presenters, Anne and Sarah. As a reminder, a recording will be going out within the next few days of this presentation. In addition, all resources will be posted on the Fair Trade College and University's website. We will also likely be advertising a bunch of those resources on our social media outlets. So if you have not liked fair trade campaigns on Facebook or Twitter, please do so. And with that, we are done. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon.